Hello, I'm Alejandro Serrano from ActiveDharma.com. Today I'm going to talk to you about devotion, why it's important, how to practice it, and how to maintain it. What are the benefits that you'll gain if you practice this devotion? Okay, so I want to start first with some of my personal practice, or rather some of my history in spiritual practice and Dharma, and how I got to appreciate the importance of devotion. I would say that several decades ago now, I was very much lost in addictions and unwholesome habits, and I needed help, immediate help, urgent help, because otherwise I was going to end up in a really bad place, in a darker place than what I was already experiencing. So what made me start practicing devotion was suffering. This was like the main driver for me to listen to someone else and do what someone else suggested to do. It wasn't something that came from me naturally, because I used to be someone very anti-authority, like a very rebellious personality, and I wasn't someone that would follow someone else so that I could get better. However, the suffering was so intense that I was willing to do anything just to get by and to feel some sort of relief, emotional relief and peace, and something that would help me feel physically better, because addictions can be a real hell. So I asked for help. I went to meetings, to recovery groups. I got a sponsor, and I started doing everything that they told me to do, because I really, really wanted to feel better. And for me, that was the first exercise of devotion. It was like the first time I was willing to do something different to what my will wanted to do. I wanted to drink more. I wanted to consume substances, or just be an asshole to other people. But since I wanted to improve my condition, I gave up and I started listening to someone else and do something else. My will was not the driver anymore, and I was willing to follow someone else's will, someone else's advice, someone else's instructions on how to live. So that was the first time I experienced devotion out of necessity, right? But then I realized that the benefits of being devoted to something wholesome were so many and so extraordinary that I began to appreciate the value of practicing devotion. And specifically, this is very important. This is why I mentioned being devoted to something more wholesome than yourself. In recovery groups, they call this a higher being, a higher purpose, right? But you can call it what you want. You could call it God, you could call it the Buddha, or something more wise than what you are. And by following this higher purpose or higher being, life improved. And unsurprisingly, of course, but to me it was very eye-opening, because I had not experienced something like that in the past. What I experienced in the past was just like temporary pleasures and temporary happiness out of just unwholesome habits, right? Just searching and chasing that pleasure and pleasant sensations everywhere, from people, from substances, from situations, from experiences. And it was so fleeting, that the happiness, and it was so ephemeral and impermanent. But when I began to follow something more wholesome than myself, the relief was more permanent, and it was also changing my life in ways I could have never imagined before. Hence, I began to practice devotion not because I was suffering, as I started practicing devotion earlier, but because it was yielding so much benefit. Okay, and this is very important, because it'll make more sense when you include devotion in a spiritual tradition, in a spiritual practice, from a religious tradition, right? Later, when I became a Buddhist and I received teachings from a sacred source, which is the Buddha, and I received the Dharma, which is, the instructions and the teachings and the habits that other Buddhists have built across centuries. Devotion was an integral part of my ascension into a better life. It made me not just a better person, but it opened the opportunity to become more productive, more reliant, more integral, more reliable to other people. People could actually trust me and rely on my word and my actions because they were congruent with each other, right? What I said and what I did began to match. So this was because I was being devoted to the Dharma, to the teachings of the Buddha. And when I saw that, when I began to witness all this, I realized that the more devoted I was, the more the skills manifested. Okay, so I began doing that, and in Buddhist tradition, in the Buddhist practice, one practices devotion in several ways. One of them is by taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which is the three jewels in the Dharma. And what you do is simply begin to follow what the Buddha says. You begin to follow the Buddha because of the example he sets to everyone else. And you follow not just the Buddha, but you follow his word, the Dharma, the teachings, because the teachings, if you begin to practice them, they have immense benefit in yourself and in your relationships with other people. And then you also follow the community, the Sangha, which is just the followers of the Buddha that have put into practice the Dharma and have obtained immense benefit from this. So by relying on other people that have acquired extraordinary qualities, you yourself begin to manifest the same qualities, right? So it's a threefold devotion practice. It's called taking refuge. But there's more practices. For example, through merit making or merit accumulation. And the way you do this is through several rituals and also by doing virtuous deeds, doing wholesome acts. The whole point of merit is to accumulate a positive force that comes from these virtuous actions that you do. If you act in a virtuous way, the results will be positive, and these accumulate and they generate a force that is so positive, so solid, that you begin to feel like protection and confidence, and it becomes like a platform for everything else that will come later, for advanced practices that will not sustain if the merit is not there. So the way you accumulate merit is a way of being devoted to the Dharma, but it becomes this like foundation for further practices. And then there are other practices like, for example, prostrations. Prostrations, that's a very extraordinary practice, and I wasn't really open to that at first, not in the Buddha Dharma, but before, when you are in recovery, when you are in a 12-step program recovery group, some of the sponsors would say, well, why don't you kneel and ask your higher being to help you, right? This is like one of the best ways to accumulate or to gather some humbleness in your life. And I wasn't really willing to do that. I was like super resistant to kneeling to a higher being, especially because at the time I was agnostic. I wouldn't say atheist, but I was very much agnostic. I didn't really know anything about spiritual practice. So the act of kneeling and humbling myself before a higher being was not natural to me. So it was very hard, but I did follow the advice because, like I said, I was suffering immensely and I really wanted to feel better. And the first time I just like get down on my knees and ask for help. I just remember that I didn't feel anything. However, I did feel some relief because giving up and surrendering does give you some relief. It was like just letting go of the control and feeling how letting go actually makes you feel better. So it made sense. Okay, let's do this more often, I said. And I'm not talking about just like getting down on my knees, but surrendering. This is a very important concept in the practice of devotion. And then when I became a Buddhist, I was already used to this benefit. I was used to the practice of getting down on my knees. So the prostration, which is to, fully go down to the floor and not just kneel, but also like throw yourself to the ground and just be completely flat, completely devoted to the higher being, which in the Buddha Dharma is the Buddha. I knew that was going to be way more powerful than just getting down on my knees. So prostrating came very natural for me when I started practicing the Buddha Dharmas. In Tibetan Buddhism, we practice what it's called nundro. And nundro is translated as preliminary practices. And one of these preliminary practices is taking refuge. And the way you take refuge in the preliminary practices is through a prayer and also through prostrations. So I was very open to do this because I already knew the benefit of doing prostrations, of surrendering, of getting down on your knees. And I thought, okay, so if I got some benefit and some relief from just getting down on my knees, I would think I would get more benefit from prostrating, do a full prostration and just lay my face on the floor and submit completely to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that's what I did. I did that many times, thousands of times. And it gave me many, I won't say skills, but it gave me many wholesome qualities. Just practicing that devotion to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, not just through my word or through my mind, but also through my body. Just doing body, speech, and mind devotion was something that yielded very special qualities. I'll talk about that in a minute. So you can also practice or gather more devotion through other rituals, through chanting, through mantra repetitions, or by honoring other Buddhist deities. When we practice devotion in Buddhism, this is not similar 100% to how devotion is practiced, for example, in Christianity, because the Buddha Dharma has a very specific view on what the Buddha is and what the sacredness of the world is, and it doesn't really correspond with how God is somewhat defined in Christianity. In the Dharma, the sacredness comes from a realization that nothing possesses inherent existence, and this realization grants not just freedom, but it also opens up your being to manifest extraordinary qualities, wholesome qualities, in a perfect way, in a very sacred way, right? So you do manifest sacredness, but not like Christians talk about it. Okay, I'm not going to get into the Christian view because that's not my expertise, so to speak. But I will say that how we practice devotion is very similar, which is surrendering to a higher being. And in this case, when we surrender to the Dharma, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we are surrendering to the view, the Buddhist view, which is many things. Okay, we don't have the time to discuss this, but let's just say that the Buddhist view includes everything is impermanent, nothing arises by itself, nothing possesses inherent existence, and everything arises dependently. Suffering has a cause, and the cause of suffering is clinging, and etc. So that's like, in a nutshell, what the Buddhist view is. And when you practice devotion to this view, it becomes manifest in your body, in your speech, and your mind. And how does this manifest? Well, you become a very wholesome person, a very authentic person. The way you have presented yourself in the past has been false, and that doesn't come up so often. It begins to diminish. It reduces its force within you, and people begin to notice this. Maybe not in the first couple of years, but maybe like 5 or 6 years later of practicing Buddhism, and specifically practicing devotion, people begin to see that the way you were being arrogant and an asshole to people, that completely goes away. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm fully free from those habits of being someone arrogant. Hopefully that will disappear one day completely, but it has disappeared much from my life. And this is because of the practice of devotion, okay? So those are like a few ways, a few examples of how devotion is practiced in the Buddha Dharma. In a very brief way, you do this by taking refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, by practicing meritorious deeds that have meritorious results, and also through rituals like ceremonies where you honor the qualities of the Buddhas, and you do this through prayers, rituals, mantras, and other practices that are similar to this. Okay, I also want to talk about the practice of devotion through meditation. And for me, this is something that has been affecting my cognition in very positive ways. Why would you want to do this? If you practice meditation just to relax or just to accumulate concentration, I'm not saying that doing that is bad. Actually, relaxing and strengthening your concentration is very beneficial in many areas of your life. I mean, that's fine, but if you only practice meditation for this, then you're missing out on many other benefits and many other skills. If you practice devotion, if you cultivate devotion through meditation, you will open many doors into acquiring many other extraordinary skills like clarity, insight, wisdom, and extraordinary patience, which is not human, right? It's transcendental patience, transcendental energy. And this is like receiving the blessings, receiving the extraordinary powers from the Buddhas, from the deities, or from Buddha nature itself. And in order to receive these powers, these skills, these blessings, devotion is the only way to do this. And I'm talking about meditational devotion. So how do you practice that? Well, first of all, what you do is, you set the stage. And the stage here is stillness, right? This is shamatha. Stillness, the accumulation of quiescence and stillness and serenity will set the stage for profound devotion. And not just stillness, but also clarity. Some people call this insight, which is vipassana, another aspect, a very important and popular aspect of meditation. I call it clarity. And clarity refers to being able to see reality as it is. You don't change it, you don't modify it, you simply let it manifest exactly as it is. And if you do this in the right way, reality will manifest as impermanent, as interdependent, as completely open and pure, and so on, right? So you establish stillness, shamatha, and clarity, vipassana. And the way you do this is, you can do this with any meditation technique. What the Buddha taught was to contemplate the breath, contemplate the body, and contemplate the mind, right? I'm not going to get into meditation guided practice at the moment, but I will say that if you notice the breath, if you notice your sensations, and if you notice the mental activity, you will begin to accumulate stillness and clarity, okay? After you establish those two aspects in meditation, once those two aspects are naturally present in your awareness, what you do is begin to trust. The key word here is trusting. And what do you trust? You trust the sensations. You trust phenomena. You trust the stillness and the clarity. And this trust feels like opening to experience. It feels like feeling in a very direct way, in a very authentic, open, without resistance. It is a vulnerability, but this vulnerability is not idiot vulnerability or weak vulnerability. It is a fearless vulnerability, okay? You trust experience, you trust your sensations, and this trust begins to deepen and expand. And you begin to trust not just what you sense with your body and your mind, but you also trust everything else that is not your body and your mind. Everything else that lies within awareness, okay? So through this, the mind and the body will begin to change. And what you'll feel is that you'll begin to immerse in meditation. You'll gain access to the meditative absorptions, the jhanas, which are marked by different sensations like bliss, like wellness, equanimity, unity of mind, and other factors that are very explicit when you access the meditative absorptions. And this is because you begin to trust the process of meditation, okay? And if you continue to do this, not maybe in one session, but in many hundreds and thousands of meditation sessions, devotion will begin to reveal the true nature of reality, the nature of your mind, and it will become very evident that Buddha nature is present within yourself and outside yourself. You'll see that everything is pure, that every single being possesses this nature, and that everything comes from this nature and goes back to this nature. Devotion will become very subtle, very deep, very ubiquitous or omnipresent. I hope I pronounced that right. And it'll grant the shift, the most important shift in the Buddha Dharma, which is to abandon a mundane way of abiding, mundane cognition in favor of extraordinary way of abiding, extraordinary cognition, which is a cognition where the self is not established, where reality is not established in an ignorant way. Your cognition becomes valid, meaning that you are not deluded in any way whatsoever. And this is what, provides a path to Buddhahood itself, okay? So this was a very brief introduction into the practice of devotion in the Dharma. If you want to ask something else, please let me know in the comments, or if you agree or disagree with anything I said, or if you want to just provide more information on this practice, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for your time and attention.